Hello viewers, welcome to Diagnostics. Dio here. Today we have a 2004 Hyundai Sonata with a 2.7 liter. The customer complaint on this car is that the check engine light is on, and the customer also stated that the vehicle has been losing power. So I was able to confirm the customer's complaint when the vehicle was outside, but as I was driving it inside the shop, I noticed that the check engine light went off. So I believe this is intermittent. And as I was driving it, I realized that it's definitely losing power. I had to floor the accelerator pedal to get it to go. So it's intermittently losing power. So let's go inside the car and confirm the customer's complaint. Hopefully the check engine light is going to remain on while the engine is running. If not, we're still going to connect the scan tool to the car to see what kind of trouble codes we have in memory so we can know what directions we can go to fix this. So let's go inside the car and scan it for some trouble codes. So we are inside the car, so we're going to confirm the customer's complaint. Hopefully the check engine light is going to remain on while the engine is running. So let's start the car. So the customer said that this light over here was remaining on and the vehicle was losing power. But as I drove it in, it was on at first and then it went off. So let's see if it's going to act up right now. So as you can see, the engine is running. I hope you can hear that. The engine is running, but the check engine light is off. So hopefully we have some pending codes in memory that will give us some direction. This tells me that the fault code we have in memory is most likely intermittent. So I'll get the scan tool connected and bring you guys back up. Alright, so right there we do have two trouble codes in memory. P0335, and it says crankshaft position sensor circuit fault, and then the second one is P1372, segment time acquisition problem. So we're gonna focus on this first trouble code, this P0335. This code can also cause this second one to be set. We're gonna focus on this one, and I believe if we fix this code, this one will also be fixed. Okay, and having this code in memory kind of explains what the customer is experiencing, because the customer said that every once in a while the vehicle loses power. It feels like it's misfiring. Although right now the check engine light is not on, it seems to run fine, but we could have a crank position sensor that's dropping out a signal. If the signal is momentarily dropping, it resets the computer, so the engine computer doesn't know the position of the piston in the cylinders, so that would cause a major power loss issue. Okay, so now the next step is going to be, let's click on this diagnose button here and see what we have there. So right here we are using the intelligent diagnostics side of the scan tool. So as you can see, this code, we don't have any technical bulletins for this trouble code. And the top repairs here indicate that usually when you have this trouble code, you will most likely have, so this orange box you see here says most likely replaced crank position sensor, and then it says replaced engine timing belt, and then the third one is replace camshaft position sensor. Well, you just don't want to replace parts based on this information you get here. Okay, I do not recommend just looking at this list. If you have access to this software, don't just look at these top repairs and then throw a crank position sensor on it. This is good information to have. Snap-on gathers all this information and makes it available to us. This is good. It can give you direction, but don't just rely on this. You still have to do your testing before you condemn a component. So that's good to know. Just reading this information here, this tells me that a defective crankshaft position sensor may cause this, just like the description of the code says, or a camshaft position sensor also can set this code. So that's good to know, and we should keep that in the back of our minds, because if we have a defective cam position sensor, it can fool you. You might believe that the issue is the crank position sensor while you have a defective cam position sensor. So that's good to know. And We can click on this smart data here to see the data for the cam position sensor, and usually if there's one that's out of range, it's gonna flag it. I don't really use this. I mean, we can just click on it just to see, but I don't see the importance of clicking on this tab here. This is kind of, I think this is gonna be pretty quick. It's kind of straightforward. So all right, so now the next step is gonna be, we're gonna back out of here and go to the troubleshooter. I want to look up this code and look up the code description and the code setting criteria. I want to know what the computer looks at, or what happens in order for the computer to set this code. Okay, so let's back out of here. So let's back one more time. Let's go to troubleshooter, and our code was P0335. So right here, let's go to P03. So right here, P0335. All right, so right here, here is our trouble code. So code P0335 indicates crankshaft position sensor malfunction, and it says code will set when crankshaft position sensor output does not change for 4 seconds. No pulses. Circuit is monitored for code setting condition with key on, engine cranking. And then here it says possible faulty crankshaft position sensor or circuit. So this code is set either by the sensor being faulty or a fault in a circuit, in the crank position sensor circuit, so the wiring. And then these are the possible causes. So possible cause, open or shorted crankshaft position sensor circuit, open sensor ground, faulty sensor, faulty PCM. PCM rarely fails. So, I mean, this is like the extreme case. And it says it here, the PCM rarely fails. And this is kind of just repetitive here. So there's a button here that says test. So let's click on this and see what kind of test we have there. So right here, it looks like we have more information about this crankshaft position sensor. And it says crankshaft position sensor is a Hall effect switch sensor located at left side engine block near flywheel, connector near rear of cylinder head. So it tells us what kind of switch it is and the location of the sensor. So it's a Hall effect. So we're gonna have a on and off square wave signal on the signal wire. So we're gonna have a, I think, a 0 to 5 square wave signal here. And it goes to say signal frequency test should be run first. If no output or output erratic, perform out of range test. Consult wiring diagram for connector view. Okay, so we're gonna have to look at the wiring diagram to know which wire is what. It's gonna be a 3-wire crankshaft position sensor. So we'll have one is gonna be a 5-volt reference, the other one is gonna be the ground, and then the third one will be the sensor signal, the signal wire. And then here it says check crankshaft signal frequency, connect components test mirror to crankshaft sensor terminal 2 and battery negative. So these are just the tests, just what you do. It's just gonna show us how to hook it up. So I don't really need to say this because I already know how to do this stuff. So let's back out of here, and now let's go back to data and let's see if we have some crankshaft position data here. So let's customize this list. Let's deselect all. Let's grab engine speed. So right here, crankshaft high, crankshaft. Okay, so we got some crankshaft data PIDs here. And then what else? I think that's all for the crankshaft. And right here, crank signal. This is gonna be either a yes or no, or a okay, or whatever that's gonna say. But so let's list this, and let's graph these two, and now let's start the car and see what happens. So, I mean, on the crank signal here, it still says off. I'm not really familiar with this. I mean, these data feeds here on these Hyundais can be a little bit weird. I mean, it should say on here now since the engine is running, but I guess this is normal. And the vehicle seems to run fine right now. It's not losing power. It's making me look like a liar. Well, let's look at the dash, and as you can see, so right there the vehicle runs fine, and these are the data feeds that we have. So it still says off here, and then basically our crank low is at 99. I don't know if this is a percentage or, and then it looks like our high here, so it's stuck at 39. So this one tends to move. See, we have some type of reaction here, but not on this side. And intermittent issues can be really tough to duplicate sometimes, because I mean, the customer dropped it off because it wasn't running well. I mean, it was losing power. The check engine light was on, but now we are getting ready to fix it. No check engine light. Well, the vehicle just died. So right there, it just died on its own. Uh-oh. So right there, I think we are able to duplicate it, I guess. So one thing I noticed is that this TCS light just came on. This traction control light. So that light right there just came on. There you go. See, I wasn't lying, guys. There's something wrong with this vehicle. So let's look at our data feeds again on the scanner. So right here, the crank signal is still showing off, and this crank low is still showing 99, and we're still showing 39 here on the high. So when I give it gas, it kind of feels, I don't know if you will be able to tell, but it's kind of bugging right now. It sounds like it's gonna fall on its face, and just look at the RPM gauge. It at least sounds weird. It doesn't sound good at all. So let's go under the hood, and this is what I want to do. I don't want to turn it off, because I feel like if I turn it off, I mean, it's intermittent. Now that I got it to act up, you see, it's supposed to go like so the engine, I mean the RPM gauge is supposed to go higher than this, but as you can see, it's falling on its face, and I can really hear that it sounds really bad. And if I go take it for a test drive right now, it's gonna lose power. So let's go under the hood, and this is what I want to do. I don't want to turn it off. We're gonna look at the crankshaft position sensor electrical connector. We're gonna find it, and we are going to use the lab scope to back probe the crankshaft position sensor ground wire and the reference wire and the signal wire. So we're gonna do that, and we will increase the engine RPMs to see if our signal is constant, because I feel like our signal is dropping out. Okay, so let's back out of here and go to our guided component test so we can know which wire is what. So let's find out. So this one is a GLS. It's a 7 point no, it's a 2.7 liter, because let's go to engine. I'm going through this just to know the wires on the electrical connector. So right here, this is the connector for the crankshaft position sensor, the electrical connector. So it looks like the first wire is a power feed, so we should have 12 volts on this, and then the second wire is the crankshaft signal, and then the third wire is the ground coming from the ECM. So it's not telling us about the wire colors here. I thought it was going to tell us the wire colors. We can go to the wiring diagram and find out which wire is what, but since it's only a 3-wire connector, okay, so it's going to be easy to find. So let's go under the hood. We're going to poke on these wires. We're going to back probe them and see. So one should have 12 volt constantly, and that 12 volt shouldn't drop, and the other one is going to be the signal, and then the third one will be the ground. So let's go under the hood and test those wires. All right guys, we are here under the hood and the engine is still running. I didn't want to turn off the engine because this fault is intermittent, and I got it to act up. It's acting up right now, so I don't want to turn it off because these camshaft and crankshaft position sensors, sometimes they tend to fail while the engine is hot. When the engine reaches operating temperature, that's when they start to fail. So if I turn it off, that might cool off the engine a little bit, and it might be tough to duplicate this. So I'm gonna try to back probe and get around the connector while the engine is running. So the connector of the crankshaft position sensor is somewhere here below this upper radiator hose. I don't know if I can really show it to you guys, but it's somewhere around here. Alright, so right over here, I don't know if you can see this wire. The wire that I'm wiggling right now, that's the wire for the crankshaft position sensor. That's the electrical connector for the sensor right there. So it looks like it has a cover around it, and I don't know if I can get around that cover because these hoses are starting to get hot. So I'll see if I can disconnect or remove that cover. I don't want to do this while the engine is running, so I will do that. I'll get that cover removed and I'll back probe the wires behind the electrical connector, and then I'll bring you guys back up. So the engine is still running, and I managed to back probe the wires of the crankshaft position sensor. So I did do that off camera. I had to remove this cover that protects the electrical connector of the crankshaft position sensor. So I'm back probing all 3 wires on the electrical connector. So the power supply, the ground, and the signal wire. So these 3 wires here are connected to the connector of the crankshaft position sensor. I mean, I did do that while the engine was running, so I'm not really sure if I'm making good connection, but we'll find out in a minute. Now that we got all the wires back probed, so now we're gonna go to our lab scope and see what kind of signal that's coming out of this sensor. Alright, so everything is connected. I hope I'm making good connection on those wires. So we have our lab scope ground connected to battery ground. So now let's back out of this guided component guide here. Now let's go to scope multimeter. So let's go to lab scope. Let's go to our 4-channel lab scope. So I have my first 3 channels connected to the sensor signal, the sensor power feed, and then the sensor ground. So now let's turn our first channel on. So as you can see, the yellow trace is our power feed, to the sensor, because the vertical line here is our voltage scale, and then the horizontal line is our time base. And Snap-on scanners actually go by time per screen. Okay, so my time base right now is 2 millisecond per screen. All right, so this is our power feed, and as you can see, we're reading around 14 volts, so system voltage. So now I'm going to turn on the second channel. So the second channel is our green trace, and based on what type of data I'm seeing here, this looks like the signal coming from the sensor. And then let's turn on the third channel, which is going to be our sensor ground. Okay, so now what we need to do is we have to do this while the engine RPM is being increased, because what we're looking for is any dropouts or glitches on the signal. So I'm going to increase my time base so we can have more detail on the screen. So let's go up to 20 milliseconds. So I'm gonna set a trigger on this. So right there. Now, what I need to do is I need to increase my engine RPM. So as I'm increasing my engine RPM, I'm gonna look for any glitches or dropouts. So as you can see, I was increasing the engine RPMs, but nothing really happened. Okay, so knowing these Snap-on scanners actually zoom out, they don't zoom in. So what I need to do to collect some data so I can have info on the data that I'm collecting, I need to decrease my time base. Let's decrease our time base to about 2 milliseconds. And now we're gonna increase the engine RPMs, and then we will pause the screen. We're gonna gather some data, and then we will zoom out so we can see if there will be anything on the waveform that's gonna catch our attention. So now I'm going to increase the engine RPMs. So that was good enough. I'm going to pause this. So we just collected some data right there. So now let's go to the zoom feature. So the buffer is going, and as you can see, we have collected a lot of data. Okay, so now let's start to zoom in. Let's zoom in on this one over here. So actually what we could do is let's kind of go around this, let's kind of go down this buffer first and see if we're gonna see anything that's gonna catch our attention. So as we were increasing the engine RPM, as you can see, our voltage supplied to the sensor did not drop, and our ground also didn't drop. Let's look at some digital numbers and see. So here are the digital numbers. Okay, so our digital numbers here show us that the ground, the sensor ground is about 0.2 volts. Okay, so 200 millivolts, and then this is average, guys. This is the type of reading you get on your multimeter. So the signal is averaging about 2.72 volts, and then our power feed is system voltage, so it's showing system voltage here. And as you can see, when we gave it gas, it went up to about what, 17 volts here. And then so this is normal, this looks good, guys. We don't have an issue there. So now let's zoom out and see if we're gonna find anything on this waveform that's gonna be out of the ordinary. Alright, so over here, this gap here you see, from this gap here, this is the missing tooth on the crankshaft reluctor wheel. So from this gap to this gap, this is one full rotation of the crankshaft. Okay, so this is what the ECM looks at to know what injectors and coils to fire. Okay, this is what it looks at to see if the cylinder number 1 is at top dead center. So I see a little bit of a drop here. I don't know if we should worry about this, but you see right over here on this waveform. So let's zoom on that. So right over here, you see this little drop. So it technically dropped out a little bit here, but I don't know if we should kind of worry about this. I mean, the waveform kind of looks good to me. Okay. So right there, I don't see any dropouts. You know, just that little one here that we saw. No glitches. Now, this is the voltage waveform. And sometimes analyzing these voltage waveforms can be a little bit tough. Unless the sensor is really defective, I mean, analyzing these can be tough sometimes. So now what I want to do, instead of looking at the voltage waveform of the sensor, I want to look at the frequency waveform. Because on this frequency waveform, we would see dropouts and glitches a lot better. Okay, so if we unfreeze this, let's unfreeze this, and let's just increase our time base a little bit here so you can see what I'm talking about. I mean, the waveform looks good. I'm gonna increase the engine RPM again. You know, so the waveform looks good. The frequency of the signal is definitely changing. It's increasing, so I don't think we have any issue here. You know, our live numbers look good. Okay, so let's back out of here and go to our graphing multimeter. Actually, before we do that, let's back out of here first and go to our guided component test and learn a little bit more about this crankshaft position sensor. So let's go to guided component test and let's go to engine and crankshaft position sensor. So I'm interested in the frequency test because that's what I'm about to do next. Let's go to frequency test. I'm sorry for the glare, guys. Now let's see what it says here. So here it says key on engine running at idle, frequency is about 700 Hz to 800 Hz. As engine RPM increases, frequency also increases. Due to uneven spacing of tone wheel, frequency at lower RPM will show evenly spaced dropouts. This is normal. Frequency will be displayed as wideband as RPM increases. Frequency should change smoothly with no glitches during test. So basically, as we do this test, we should know that there will be some dropouts, you know, that will be evenly spaced. Those are normal, but we don't want to see any glitches on the frequency waveform. Okay, so that's good to know. Let's back out of here. Actually, let's just hit the home tab. Let's go back to our lab scope. So the good thing is we're not dropping our power, or our ground is not going really high, so that's good. Now let's go to our graphing multimeter because that's where we're gonna find our frequency scale. Graphing multimeter, let's go to frequency. So right over here. So my second channel is the channel that's connected to the sensor signal wire. Okay, so it looks like our scales here look good. I mean, remember it said that at idle we should have 700 to 800 Hertz. Okay, and we should see some dropouts that are evenly spaced. So this is what we are seeing here, and this is normal. I saw a little glitch up here. I don't know if you saw that. So now what we need to do is we need to increase our engine RPM, and we shouldn't see any glitches here. So now I'm gonna increase the engine RPM and let's see what happens. Whoa! did you see that? Let's pause this and let's go back a little bit. Wow, check this out. Haha, this is pretty sweet. You see this? These glitches here is what we don't want to see. These dropouts here, like we read in the guided component test, this is normal, but the glitches up here are not normal. Okay, so we definitely have a defective crankshaft position sensor. So with this data, I feel comfortable calling for a crankshaft position sensor. So now what we need to do, this is pretty definitive enough. We're gonna replace this crankshaft position sensor, and I'm sure once we replace it, this vehicle will be fixed. The crankshaft position sensor lives somewhere around this area. It is over there underneath the exhaust manifold. So I will turn off the car so we can get to it and replace it. And after we replace it, we can back probe the signal wire again and do this test to see if this one is gonna have a lot of glitches, if the new one is gonna have a lot of glitches. But I mean, the sensor is bad. And remember, when we were looking at the voltage waveform, we couldn't see this. So the voltage waveform is good, but sometimes you also have to look at your frequency waveform, because sometimes you may not see anything on the voltage waveform. The voltage waveform may look good, but you can only see the fault on the frequency waveform. So it's always good to do both of them, because the voltage waveform looked pretty good. Although we had that little drop, you know, on that one leading edge, but I mean, that wasn't really convincing. So one more thing I could do is, I know that the camshaft position sensor on this vehicle is also a Hall effect sensor. So what I can do is I can back probe the signal wire on the camshaft position sensor, and then we can also look at the frequency waveform of the camshaft position sensor to see if it's gonna have a lot of glitches like this one. If it doesn't have any glitches, that would again confirm to us that this sensor is defective. I know it's defective, but let's do that. So I'm going to back probe the signal wire of the camshaft position sensor and bring you guys back up. Alright guys, so I did back probe the signal wire on the camshaft position sensor. So here it is. This green connector here you see is the connector for the camshaft position sensor. And I'm using this blue test lead to back probe the signal wire. So now what we need to do is we're gonna compare this one, because this is the waveform we got from the crankshaft position sensor, and this is the frequency waveform. So now we are going to unfreeze this so we can look at the waveform, the frequency waveform from the camshaft position sensor, which is also a Hall effect sensor. So let's unfreeze this, and now we are going to turn this channel off. So channel 2, now we're gonna turn on channel 1. Okay, so channel 1 is on. I'm going to turn on the other trace. Okay, so this is what we were looking at previously, and the yellow one is the camshaft position sensor. Alright guys, so we're gonna do this last test before we replace this crankshaft position sensor. I mean, all the tests I already did were definitive enough, but I want to go just in one extra step to compare these two signals. So the yellow trace is our signal, so the frequency waveform coming from the camshaft position sensor, and then the green trace is gonna be the frequency waveform coming from the crankshaft position sensor. So we previously saw this, and we determined that these little dropouts here are normal, and when we increased the engine RPMs, we saw that this one had a lot of glitches in it, and I could already see little glitches going through. So this is abnormal. But this one here on the camshaft position sensor, you see this is a straight and nice line. There are no glitches or dropouts on this line. So now what I need to do is I'm going to increase our engine RPMs. So once I increase our engine RPMs, this waveform here should increase and decreases as the frequency increases also, because the camshaft spins faster, so the frequency will increase and it should also decrease with the engine RPMs. But we shouldn't see any glitches or dropouts on these signals. So now I'm going to increase the engine RPMs. I don't know if you saw those glitches already. Actually, let's increase our scale. Let's increase our scale on the camshaft frequency here, on the camshaft waveform. I mean, you can't really see it, but it's moving. Let's just go up to 100. So can you tell? You see how nicely this yellow trace is increasing and with no glitches? Let me turn off the second channel first and just watch the yellow trace by itself. So watch this. You see how it's increasing nicely? Let me increase our time base so we can have more detail. So look how nice this is increasing. Let's increase this one more time. So this is what we need to see even on the crankshaft position sensor frequency waveform. It should increase nicely and then decrease with the engine RPMs, but we shouldn't see any dropouts or glitches. We shouldn't see any glitches here. On the crankshaft position sensor, it says that the dropouts are normal. It's okay to have the dropouts, but not the glitches up here. Okay, so it should be this nice. So again, this confirms to us one more time that the crankshaft position sensor is defective. So let's just bring this back in here one more time. So watch this. So let's pause this. Just look at the difference. Can you see? You see all these glitches here, but there's nothing. So no glitches on the camshaft frequency waveform. So that's it, guys. Bad crankshaft position sensor. Okay, so now I feel comfortable replacing this crankshaft position sensor. So I'm gonna go inside the car and turn it off, and then we're gonna get this crankshaft position sensor replaced. Okay, so with all these wires being back probed, we increased the engine RPMs. You saw that our power and ground were not dropping. Okay, so I don't have to show you that again. Our power and ground were not dropping. We don't have a power and ground issue. Our wiring is also good. So the issue is just the crankshaft position sensor itself. So I'm gonna turn off the car so we can get this sensor replaced. Alright, so we are here under the vehicle and the crankshaft position sensor lives right here above the starter. So it looks like we're gonna have to remove the starter so we can get access to the crankshaft position sensor. So I will get the starter removed and then I'll bring you guys back up so I can show you the sensor before I replace it. Alright, so I did remove the starter and here is our crankshaft position sensor. This is the connector for it. So now I'm gonna remove the little 10mm bolt that holds the crankshaft position sensor in place. I already cracked it with a ratchet. So now our sensor should be able to come out. So we're here on the bench and this is our old crankshaft position sensor. So we have determined that this sensor is defective. The tip of the sensor is magnetic. So one quick test you could do is just get a metal piece and put it in front of the sensor. The sensor should be able to attract the metal piece. But as you can see, it's not even attracting this bolt. Not all sensors do this, but usually when you have a weak magnet on the sensor tip. So you can test that by just putting a piece of metal, you know, in front of it, and if it does attract it, it means your sensor is defective. But this also doesn't work on all sensors. All right, so again, we already determined that this sensor is defective. This is one test you can also do if you don't have all the tools to diagnose a defective crankshaft position sensor. So I got the replacement part. This is the part number here. So this is our new sensor that we're gonna install. So I'm going to get it out of the box. And here it is. So this is the new sensor. So I will get it out of this plastic bag and install it. And once I get this installed, I will bring you guys back up. Alright guys, so I did replace the crankshaft position sensor. So now I'm about to start the vehicle so we can double check our repair before we wrap up this video. So I'm gonna start the car and let's see what kind of signal we're gonna see on the lab scope. So I'll start the car now. So the car is running, I hope you can tell, and it definitely runs better. Let's go to the lab scope. Actually, no, let's just go to our graphene multimeter and let's go to our frequency scale. So what we're seeing down here is our crankshaft frequency waveform. Okay, so alright, so the green trace here on the screen is the crankshaft frequency waveform, and then the yellow trace is going to be the camshaft frequency waveform. So now I'm going to increase the engine RPM. Can you tell the difference? This looks a lot better. Okay, so you see how clean that is? Very nice. Very, very nice. Can you tell the difference? Before on the crankshaft frequency waveform, there were a lot of glitches over here. Okay, but see how nice and consistent this is. Okay, so frequency waveform is very good. It's always good to check because I couldn't see this on the voltage waveform. So this looks very good. I don't know if you can even tell by the way the engine sounds right now. So right here, we have a nice and consistent increase in frequency. And remember, these dropouts here are normal, but the glitches up here were abnormal. And on the other sensor, we had glitches up here. And right now, once we replace the sensor, everything looks nice. This waveform is a lot cleaner. So this vehicle is fixed, guys. Now what I need to do is I only have to back out of here. I can do this while the engine is running. I can just hit the home tab and then erase the trouble code. I can erase the trouble code, and then we're gonna take this for a test drive. And then, I mean, just by the way it sounds, I don't even want to take it on a test drive. I know this is fixed. I'm gonna erase the code and then I will turn off the vehicle so we can wrap up this video. Okay, so I did turn off the car and the scan tool has identified the vehicle. Let's click OK. Let's go to engine. Let's go to codes. So here are the trouble codes that we originally had in memory. There's one thing we can do. We can either erase these codes, or we can just go for a test drive, drive it around, and then eventually these codes will erase themselves. Okay, so here it says circuit fault. Well, we did test the wiring. There's power going to the sensor, there's ground, and as we were increasing the engine RPMs when we were doing our test, the power wasn't dropping out and the ground wasn't dropping out, or it wasn't even increasing. So our wiring to the sensor is good. So we confirmed that already. Let's clear the codes. So the codes are cleared, and let's double check and see if we have no codes present right now. So right there, no codes present. Let's back out of here. And so right here is our waveform. You know, you can see a huge difference between this waveform and the waveform that we were seeing before. Okay, you see how clean this waveform is. So I'm going to put everything back together. I will disconnect all these test leads that I have here in the engine bay. I'm going to reinstall these electrical connector covers that they have in this electrical connector. One is for the crankshaft position sensor, and then the other one is for the camshaft position sensor. I'm gonna put everything back together, and then I'll bring you guys back up so that we can wrap up this video. Alright guys, so I'm gonna leave you right over here. We were able to confirm the customer's complaint. Although when I brought the vehicle inside the shop, the check engine light wasn't on. We connected the scan tool to the vehicle and we retrieved two DTCs. The first DTC was P0335, and we focused on that DTC. That DTC was for the crankshaft position sensor. We read a little bit about the crankshaft position sensor. We found out that this crankshaft position sensor is a Hall effect type sensor, and we know Hall effect sensors make a square wave signal. They make a 0 to 5 volt square wave signal. Some of them make a 0 to 8, sometimes 0 to 12, but most of them, this one was making a 0 to 5 volt square wave. And we came here under the hood, we checked the wiring, we determined that the sensor is receiving power and ground. Those power and ground were not dropping while the engine was running. So we connected the lab scope to the sensor and we looked at the voltage waveform of the signal. So the voltage waveform looked good. The sensor had been generating a pretty decent signal. So then we couldn't really see the fault. So we switched to the frequency test. That's when we were able to see the fault. So the sensor was definitely producing a frequency signal, but the frequency signal that the old sensor was producing had a lot of glitches on it. Okay, and we compared it with the camshaft position sensor frequency signal, and we noticed that on the camshaft position sensor signal, the signal was really smooth and it was increasing very well and it didn't have any glitches on it. So that already told me that the crankshaft position sensor was defective. At that point, you know, if you just had replaced the sensor, you could have gotten lucky and the vehicle would have been fixed. But that's not what we do around here. We test components, we test wirings before we replace the component. You just don't throw parts at a vehicle. You test first before you replace a component. Alright, so that's that. And one thing I also just wanted to point out, I don't know if I said that already, with the voltage waveform we couldn't see the glitches. We saw the glitches with the frequency waveform. It's always good to check the frequency, because on some sensors you may not be able to see that unless the sensor is really bad. You may not be able to see the fault, the glitches or the dropouts on the voltage waveform. You have to do a step, you have to go a step further to check your frequency to see all the faults, the dropouts and the glitches that we were able to see. So that's already told me that the sensor was defective. We replaced the sensor and then we compared the signal that the new sensor had been producing, and we saw that the new signal was nice and clean, it was consistent, and we compared it with the camshaft position sensor signal. It was really nice. So I don't have to take you guys on a test drive with this. We don't have to go on a test drive. The vehicle is fixed. I already erased the trouble codes, and right now our codes are not coming back. So I'm gonna drive it outside and I'll call the customer so he can come and pick up his vehicle. So I hope you like this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why. If this is your first time here, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Diagnostics. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. Thanks for your time, guys. Thanks for watching. See you next time.